freight train rolling, bringing truth bombs down the line. More than the Southland, 1 week at a time. More than the Southland, 1 week at a time. SCV Chat starts now.
I got a new watch. Still,
I got the same watch.
It still didn't help us start exactly on time, but close enough.
It was honestly pretty good for how long we've been out of it.
Yeah, and hey, you know, it's a new year, so I get roughly 52 chances to screw up the disclaimer. Speaking of disclaimers, the views and opinions expressed on this broadcast are not necessarily those of the SCV, its GEC, its executive director, nor any division, brigades, camps, or other subsidiaries, strictly those of us expressing them if we get into opinions. Ha!
We'll probably will.
I doubt it. Happy New Year. Hope everybody had a blessed Christmas and Hanukkah and any other Festivus. Can't forget Festivus.
Feliz Navidad.
Yeah, that's a little bit. That's a little past. But hope everybody had a blessed season. Surrounded by your families and loved ones. I know I did.
Amen.
Although we didn't cook this year like we normally do, I was told last second that, hey, we're doing finger foods. To which I was like, huh. Well, that's not Christmas. Then I talked to Adam, and Adam's like, yeah, well, we're just doing finger foods. And I was like, how do you feel about that? And he didn't like it, and I was like, yeah. So
I don't like that either. We're going to eat when the Dolls men come over.
Actually, Victor, we started, but because we have a long introduction to allow people to get in, we were on time. At least on time according to my phone, and watch, which is all that mattered. Because if not, we'd still be backstage jamming. We were having a really, really good jam session. I was having a better one until Harrison came in. He caught me on my last song of the evening. That's normally what we do behind the scenes, is make sure we have all of our notes in order, and if we're ready to run, then we turn on music and go from there. Harrison missed some of the wonderful, funny songs from their I Messed It Up YouTube page. Not a plug for them, but they take AI and they take like the song War Pigs that Black Sabbath did and set it to John Denver's Country Roads, and it even sounds like John Denver singing it, which is, to me, is kind of funny. But I hope everybody, again, is having a happy New Year. Hope everybody's staying warm. I can say without a doubt that it is roughly 32 degrees. It is freezing here in the central Mississippi area, and steadily dropping. Tony, I hope that you're having fun with the snow, even though you say it'll probably melt. You can have it. You can keep it. I choose to live in a humid subtropical area for a reason. I complain about it during the summer, but I will take it because God gave us air conditioning and over the snow. I really don't like snow. Yeah, Jason.
I love the winter.
Sorry, I'm not
sharing.
I'm not saying that I don't love winter. I'm saying I don't love snow because snow is it's wet and it's coarse and it gets everywhere.
I thought that was sand.
Yeah, something like that. I was trying to catch you off guard on it.
Did a pretty good job.
Yeah. So anyway, J-Bo already knows what we're talking about tonight because he is on our Patreon. Remember that if you would like to start the new year off with a bang and support SCV Chat, go to patreon.com. Actually, go to scvchat.com. That's our wonderful website. Click on the support us. You want to show them how to do it there, Moose?
Yeah.
Want to be useful?
Yeah. I'll try to be useful, at least part of the show. Well, that's not working. 1 second. There we go. Now we're getting somewhere. I have to pull it up first so we can actually have it.
Yeah. While he's doing that, Windows did an upgrade on my computer and signed me out of everything. So I've been rebuilding my sign-in stuff on my Google Chrome for the past 3 or 4 days, and
I would lose it.
Yeah, I kind of have, because Harrison and I shared the scvyouthoutreach@gmail.com email address, and it will not let me log in because Harrison is set up as the primary holder.
No,
And even though like you think you can click, verify another way, it will not let me send me a text message.
I know, and that pissed me off because the whole reason. Now, of course, it's after a hack attempt. I started putting everything in two-step verification to keep us safe, and of course, keep myself safe after my hack attempt. So I did this, and I didn't know. I was like, okay, there's multiple ways, because this had happened before. And Connor called me one day very early in the morning, very upset that he couldn't get into anything SCV chat related because I'd added two-step verification to everything.
And left a key important portion of that story out.
I'm always out of data, and so it won't load for me to sign him in.
No, not that. You didn't tell me you were putting on two-step verification.
No, didn't tell him a single wink. So Connor probably was freaking out a bit until he probably realized it was sending it to me. But, after that incident, I like to call it, I was like, okay, well, I mean, luckily now there's 2 ways you can verify. You can give their number. I did that for our website. I did that for our email, blah, 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 and so on and so on.
Google still won't work.
And it had been working all the way up until now when Connor needed it.
Yeah.
And for some reason, it won't let him sign in with his phone number anymore, which pisses me off because I just used it to sign in on on my computer, because my computer had signed me out because I hadn't been on my computer in so long.
Yeah, so the moral of the story is, if you would go and purchase a Patreon membership, we can upgrade our website to where we can have actual SCV chat email addresses. But show them how to get to Patreon there, Moose. You click under more under scvchat.com, right?
Yeah. So this is the homepage of scvchat.com. You hit more.
Let me pull down the logo. Here we go.
All right, so you're going to click more. Hit support us, and you'll get a direct link to our Patreon. Just click the Patreon button that's blinking right now.
Yeah. And also, if you're already on our Patreon, you can go and buy a t-shirt from our bonfire store. Especially with the 250th of America's birthday coming up. We do have that awesome Thomas Jefferson one, and the South was right in 61 because America's right in 76. As well as those. I forgot the Moose Hunt 2025 t-shirt.
Oh, dick nabbit.
Forgot about that one.
Yeah, so did I. I don't even remember adding it to the website.
Yeah. Get 4 free shots at Moose. But, just because it is the first week back, just to give everybody a little bit of a heads up, this is kind of our running schedule for between now and April, at least on the Monday show. The 13th, our game plan is to talk about Earl Van Dorn. On the 20th, Sterling Price. So especially our brethren in Missouri watching this later on, that episode's kind of dedicated to you. The 27th, we'll have our first Hearth and Home episode with Adam Southern, talking about the things that are coming to your headquarters for 2025. Just as a little bit of foreboding, I will not be on that episode. I've got to go speak at a camp. On February 3rd, William Wirt Adams, who's kind of a Mississippi, he was born in Kentucky. He fought in the Republic of Texas Army when Texas was its own independent republic. moved to Mississippi, fought for the Confederacy of Mississippi, but very interesting guy, but not really well known. On February 10th, we're going to talk about the Meridian Expedition, which was Sherman's march to the sea from Vicksburg, Mississippi, all the way to Meridian, and the things that happened with it. It was a practice for it, but we'll be right in those days. So it was a good episode plan. February 17th, we're going to talk about S.D. Lee. We've talked about him, but we've never dedicated an episode to him. Of course, February 24th, we'll be back with Hearth and Home. In March, we'll be doing William Mahone the first week, Edward C. Walthall the second week, the third week, the Second Battle of Corinth, and we'll finish up with Hearth and Home, and that will get us to April for Confederate Heritage Month. Kind of our theme that we're going with is kind of the unknown Confederacy. So we're picking some rather unknown Confederate heroes as well as unknown campaign and battles to talk about. Stuff that's important, and it all kind of builds upon each other. For example, Sterling Price and Earl Van Dorn were commanders during the Second Battle of Corinth. Stephen D. Lee and Ward Adams were involved in the Meridian Expedition. So it kind of all builds. William Mahone, just because I've found him interesting on my reading over the Christmas break. One thing we do want to do for our Patreon folks, we do want to apologize. Sometimes life comes at you fast and we have to roll with the punches. We did not get a chance to record the Albion Seed episode like we had planned. Stuff happened. I took on a client with my side gig. So I had to dedicate time getting that client set up. And we'll be busy with him until June 3rd. But we're going to have an episode before then. And then, of course, Moose had stuff pop up in his life as well. So we're going to try to get the episode done as soon as possible. So still have some time to get caught up reading Albion Seed, especially you, Moose.
I was ready.
Well, life comes at you fast.
It does. It does. Very, very quickly sometimes. I still can't believe it's season 6, 2025.
Yeah. So, one last chance for everybody to guess.
What are we talking about? Just give us your best guesses in the chat. And while we're waiting on the guesses, make sure to share this out. Like, comment, follow us if you haven't, subscribe if you haven't.
Well, I'm going to put his picture up for tonight. Go ahead and give that answer to that question. I've got it load. There we go. There's the hide comment button. Did you notice that StreamYard changed their naming of stuff?
Yeah,
it's very confusing now.
I don't like it.
Yeah, well, we just got to get used to it.
Yeah, I mean, we'll get used to it. Oh, what in tarnation?
That's new.
I don't like that either. Well,
I do. I'm not going to pull up the names because those are preset that I built in there. I like that one because it's orange.
How did you? Oh, what?
Yeah, that's so y'all could still see us.
Oh no.
Anyway, tonight we're talking about A.P. Hill. Now, you may be wondering to yourselves, why are we talking about A.P. Hill? But the question that I want to pose to the greater SCV Chat viewing audience is, why aren't we talking about A.P. Hill? In doing research for this episode, I found him to be a very interesting person. A very who was the man that was yeah, exactly. A very interesting person. That kind of gets me to the beginning of tonight's episode. I'm gonna paint the picture because I enjoy painting pictures, at least with words. On the spring afternoon of 10 May 1863, Lieutenant General Thomas Jonathan Jackson, aka Stonewall, was gravely ill from pneumonia, laying on a sick bed, consumed by a fever that steadily worsened. Earlier that day, his wife, Mary Anna Jackson, told the ailing general, "Before this day closes, you will be with the blessed Savior in his glory." As the day wore on, Jackson's condition grew dire and his breathing became labored. Leaving him weak and exhausted in the face of impending death, Jackson refused the comfort of water and brandy offered by his personal physician, Dr. Hunter Holmes McGuire. Instead, he chose to, quote, "preserve my mind to the last." As he drifted in and out of consciousness, McGuire recounted a powerful moment around 3:15. In his delirium, Jackson called out in military command voice, "Order A.P. Hill to prepare for action. Pass the infantry to the front. Tell Major Hawks." But the sentence was cut off unfinished. Moments later, a peaceful smile crossed Jackson's pale face, and with an expression of sincere relief, he murmured, "Let us cross over the river and rest under the shades of the tree." 7 years later, on 12 October 1870, General Robert E. Lee, similarly weakened by illness and bedridden in his dining room. Lee had battled health problems for a decade, with vague symptoms of rheumatism first appearing in 1860. By March of 1863, Lee had developed a heavy cold, accompanied by severe chest pains, later attributed to a rheumatic inflammation of the heart sac. Likely, this was his first heart attack. Another heart attack would follow in September of 1864. After the war, while serving as president of Washington College, Lee's health continued to decline. By March of 1866, he was experiencing classic symptoms of angina pectoris, a condition that made even short walks painful. And there's a quote where he said to a colleague that he could not walk from his house to the college without being in pain. A colleague noted that Lee's evident depression and further medical tests confirmed the seriousness of his heart issues. He went and actually saw a specialist in Savannah, Georgia, who looked at Lee's heart and said that, yeah, he was having problems. It's written heavily about in the book Lee, The Last Years. I digress, though. On the 28th of September, 1870, Lee attended a vestry meeting at Grace Church in Lexington and sat there despite the fact that it was an unheated church and it was a rather cool afternoon. The meeting went on longer than expected. Lee returned home about an hour and a half after his wife and daughters expected him to be home. After returning home, Lee collapsed while attempting to say grace at dinner, supper, signaling that he had a stroke. In fact, I believe the exact account was Lee began to speak. He couldn't speak. He sat down in his chair, began murmuring and speaking incoherently. They sent for the doctor, and the doctors pretty much said that he had a stroke. But for the next 2 weeks, Lee lingered into the dining room, which the family had transformed into his sick room. Douglas Southall Freeman wrote that despite the confusions of his mind, Lee's discipline remained, and Lee continued on to linger for 2 weeks. But on October the 11th, Lee began to take a turn. He refused nourishment, but would swallow medicine when prompted by his doctors. His mind wandered, though, through the memories of battle, and he muttered unintelligible words, perhaps prayers or orders. At one point, his voice rang out clear, "Tell Hill he must come up," spoken with such clarity and force that all in the room understood. And on the morning of October 12th, Lee's pulse grew weak and his breathing shallow. His last reported words were "strike the tent" before he passed away. The fact that both Generals Lee and General Jackson, his commanding officers from two different portions of his military career, in their final moments included a call for A.P. Hill has to say something about him. You know, Jackson commanded Hill in the 2nd Corps of the Army of Northern Virginia until Jackson's death in 1863. And after Jackson's death, Hill was promoted to the command of the newly formed 3rd Corps and was directly under the command of Robert E. Lee. But again, both men called for Hill in their last moments. There has to be something to the man. The man had to have some type of impact on the lives of his commanders. As an autodidact historian, the both of us, even though Harrison is still a poor broke college student and I do have a minor in history, my research at least has been primarily focused on the Army of Mississippi and the Army of Tennessee. Specifically the Western Theater, while much of Confederate history centers on the Eastern theaters. I have done very limited research, as I've mentioned before, on the A&V, strictly because most of my ancestors served in the Army of Tennessee or in the Army of Mississippi. I had very few ancestors who fought in the A&V, so it hasn't been a real project of mine until late. I figured there was enough scholarly research out there that could help people. So I focused on the West, but from reading things dealing with my ancestors who did serve in A.P. Hill's Corps, I began wanting to dive more and more into him. And really the getting into this episode, the research for this episode is how I came about studying Little Powell Hill. So that's who we're talking about tonight. Excuse me, I am putting in my dip of snuff for yeah, and I know that there are those that account that disputes out DSF's account of Lee's passing. I believe the first quote about calling up A.P. Hill and striking the tent came from Rob Jr.'s memoirs, who wasn't even there. The daughters say he didn't say anything. Having been a son who, lost his father and was there for his passing, I don't remember every single detail. I remember it all as a blur. He could have said it. He could not have said it. Southall Freeman being the historian that he was, I tend to believe that, he would have said it at some point. Was it did he say it right then? Maybe, maybe not. Maybe it was another day as part of the delirium, because Lee suffered for 2 weeks after his stroke. So it could have been, early on after the stroke. It could have been, or it could have been there on the 11th. Who knows? So that's yeah. Anyway, let me get back to my notes. So, Ambrose Powell Hill Jr., commonly referred to as Little Powell by his soldiers or Powell by his family, was born on the November 29th, 1825, at his father's plantation, Greenland, in Culpeper, Virginia. The youngest of 7 children to Major Thomas Hill, a successful statesman, planter, and merchant, and Fanny Russell Baptist Hill. He hailed from a prominent Virginia family deeply embedded in the Virginia gentry. Hill's lineage was connected to influential figures, including one uncle that he was named for, Ambrose Powell, who was a respected legislator, and Captain Ambrose Powell, who he was again named for, who was an explorer and a close friend of President James Madison. Growing up in Culpeper, Hill's early life was typical of that of the Virginia elite. He was lucky to receive a formal education in his youth and easily received an appointment to the United States Military Academy of West Point in 1842. He would have been in the infamous class of 1846. In fact, while at West Point, Hill was assigned to be roommates with a cadet from New Jersey by the name of George B. McClellan. Remember that because he pops up a couple more times in the story. Hill, while at the academy, was a middling student, but was somewhat popular and forged relationships with future adversaries as well as allies, men like George Pickett, Cabdus Wilcox, Darius Couch, and Thomas Jonathan Jackson. However, Jackson and Hill did not get along. Hill, being of a higher social class, kind of looked down his nose at Jackson. They had completely different personalities. Jackson, of course, not having the formal education that Hill had, struggled his first couple of years, where, Hill had the education, just, liked to goof off a little bit in his off time hours. In the summer between the second year and third year, West Point cadets were given their first furloughs, and Hill, en route to Virginia, stopped in nearby New York City on the way home. And despite the warning of the superintendent of West Point to avoid the, quote, harems of pleasure on Church and Mercy streets, he visited a certain house of ill repute and contracted a disease. We're not going to name the disease, but you can join Patreon and read what he really had. This would lead to severe health complications. He was sick so much in the following semester that he was required to repeat his third year, and would be reassigned to the class of 1847. But there he made new friendships, in particular with Henry Heath and Ambrose Burnside. In that class, he would graduate 15th out of 38 cadets in 1874. Hill would suffer from this old soldier's disease from the rest of his life, but despite his health struggles, Hill began a promising career in the U.S. Army, serving first in the U.S. artillery during the Mexican War, and there at the end was assigned to a cavalry regiment and fought in a couple of skirmishes, but his combat experience was limited. I do want to point out that if you remember in the major military sciences, that the top of the top was the Corps of Engineers. The next one was the Corps of Artillery. And Jackson, who had graduated a year before, was also assigned to the Corps of Artillery. So it really speaks to Hill's ability as a student and his knowledge to be assigned to the artillery. After being recalled from Mexico, he was posted to Fort McHenry in Maryland, and like so many others, was sent to Florida to fight the Seminoles in the Seminole War. During the next few years in Florida, except for a brief interlude in Texas, Hill would be there and would actually contract yellow fever and miraculously survive. But because of his poor health, the Army decided to assign him to a less strenuous task. And he finished his antebellum years working for the U.S. Coastal Survey, headquartered in Washington, D.C. While serving in this capacity, Hill fell deeply in love with a lady named Ellen Marcy, sometimes called Nellie. She was the daughter of a prominent federal, it was all federal army at that time, but a very prominent major in the U.S. Army. And so did about 8 other guys. One of them being his former roommate and classmate, George B. McClellan. In fact, of the 8 or 9 suitors she had, all of them proposed marriage, but she rejected all of them. All but one, Hill. She accepted Hill's proposal, rejected the rest. But because the pre-war Army was so small and it was a very close-knit officer corps, when you think about it, men knew about Hill's condition. And when Nellie informed her family that she was going to marry Ambrose Powell Hill, her father was not happy about it and said, "No, you're not." And she said, "Yes, I am." And he said, "No, you don't know the whole story," explained the entire situation, and she promptly broke up with him. Despite this heartbreak, though, Hill soon found solace with another young lady, a Kentuckian named Catherine, aka Kitty Morgan. Now, you think about Kentucky and you think about the last name Morgan. Who do y'all think that is? Don't worry.
I'm seeing if anybody will get it. Got a past commander-in-chief in the house with Paul Grambling Jr.
Wait. Aha! Tony, got it right. Yes, that is correct. Kitty was the sister of John Hunt Morgan. So it just shows how really small the circles are, and adds another little bit of interest into AP Hill's life, being related to John Hunt Morgan. The couple wed in 1859, and soon after his wedding, Hill was a groomsman at George McClellan's marriage to Nellie. So, yes, his former fiance broke things off with him to date and court his former roommate, but Hill did not hold any grudges and was a groomsman at the wedding. But it was said that during the war, especially in 1862, whenever Hill knew that he was going up against George B. McClellan, he fought with extra gallantry and valor, just trying to, I guess, just trying to show up his former roommate. Now, at the outbreak of the war, this is one thing that I found very, very interesting. According to Kitty, after the war, she wrote saying that Hill never owned slaves and never approved of the institution of slavery. Although, some members of his family did, he did not. So, as the Southern states succeeded in 1861, Hill resigned from the U.S. Army on March 1st to join the Confederacy. And that's a very key date. Not only is it my birthday, which doesn't exist, but it's before Virginia actually seceded from the Union. He left the U.S. Army to offer his services to the Confederacy. This was before Fort Sumter and Abraham Lincoln's illegal call for 75,000 volunteers to put down rebellion in the South. But still, that just shows where his mind was with the South, even before his state seceded. Of course, Virginia would later secede. And when Virginia seceded, he was appointed colonel of the 13th Virginia Infantry and quickly rose to prominence during the early stages of the war. Also, at that time, his wife, when he left to go off to war, his wife was expecting child. The 13th Virginia was assigned to Joe Johnston's Army of the Shenandoah, where he and the regiment served with distinction at the Battle of First Manassas in July. After service in the Romney campaign, Hill received a promotion to brigadier general on February 26, 1862. His leadership and battlefield success led to further promotion to major general in May of 1862, placing him in command of the newly formed Light Division, and that's what he called his division, was the Light Division. He's the one that started giving it the nickname, in Longstreet's wing of the Army Northern Virginia. Hill's rookie division was in the thick of fighting during the 7 days battles, being heavily engaged at Mechanicsville, Gaines Mill, and Glendale. Now, we'll get serious for a second, like I haven't been serious since this entire talk so far. Hill was described as one historian as a contentious fellow. And Hill would gain a reputation for clashing with his superiors. Following the 7 days campaign, Hill became involved in a dispute with his boss, James Longstreet, over a series of newspaper articles that appeared in the Richmond Examiner. Relations between them deteriorated to the point that Hill was placed under arrest by Longstreet, who was insisting that Hill had not followed orders, and Hill challenged Longstreet to a duel. Hill went ahead and asked for a transfer from Robert E. Lee, and Lee granted it. Now, I do think that he moved literally from one wing to the other, but it was under Stonewall Jackson. I do think that it is fair to mention that when Robert E. Lee was doing all this, he sent many a Confederate officer over to the Western Theater, like Stephen D. Lee, he'd sent over to the Western Theater. W.W. Loring, he'd sent over to the Western Theater at this point. And instead of moving him completely out of the theater of operations, I'm sure Lee kept him around because he saw the potential and the hard fightingness of Hill. Anyway, Hill's relationship with Jackson was not much better than with Longstreet. The two men had long-standing personal animosities dating back to their days at West Point. By this point in Jackson's life, because after the Mexican Wars, when he found his home in the Presbyterian Church and believing in the Calvinist doctrine of Christianity, Jackson had become more overtly pious and deeply religious. Hill did not encounter that while fighting under Longstreet. Hill also disliked how regimented Jackson was, and he did not like Jackson's tediously long marches. One historian wrote saying that that Jackson had great relationships with his superiors, but terrible relationships with his subordinates, while Hill was the opposite. Jackson had the problem of communicating up the chain of command, but he had more of the "I'll let you know when it's time for you to know" attitude with his subordinates, and Hill did not appreciate that. At one point, Jackson had Hill arrested for not following his march procedures, which sparked a feud that lasted the rest of Jackson's life. We'll get into that here in a second. Hill's division, though, became famous for its speed and aggression, and Hill proved himself as one of the ANV's most dependable generals. His forces played a critical role at Cedar Mountain, where Hill launched a counterattack that stabilized the Confederate left flank. Second Manassas, Hill was placed the Confederate left along the railroad cut, and held it against repeated U.S. attacks. And I believe, Jason, you mentioned it earlier about the rocks and the bayonets. The men actually ran out of ammunition, and the Federals were getting ready to charge again, that the men made and again, no ammunition, began throwing dirt clods and rocks at them and screaming at them, and just scared the Yankees away with their resolve, without hardly a round between them. Correct me if I'm wrong on that, but I believe that is in my mind for some reason. Continuing on, though, with 1862, during the Sharpsburg campaign, or the Maryland campaign, Hill and Jackson began bickering more, especially about marching orders that I alluded to earlier. And that is when Jackson placed Hill under arrest. Lee, though, intervened and ordered the generals to stop bickering and Hill's arrest to be put on hold. During the campaign, Hill successfully had beaten the Federal troops that were holding Harper's Ferry, forcing them to surrender and secured the town. And he then conducted a remarkably fast forced march to Sharpsburg from Harper's Ferry, and he and the Light Division reached the battlefield at Antietam, just moments in the nick of time, saving General Robert E. Lee's army from a disastrous defeat. While the battle was technically a draw, it could have been far worse for the Confederates had Hill not arrived in such a timely fashion. But as the campaign came to an end and the army looked like it was going into winter quarters, Hill and Jackson's relationship continued to deteriorate. Despite his battlefield successes, the rancor between Hill and Jackson continued through the Battle of Fredericksburg and Chancellorsville. General Lee had to intervene on several occasions, as we mentioned earlier, and mediate these disputes. During the Battle of Fredericksburg, it's reported that Hill was ill with complications from the old soldier's disease. And that affected his command structure there, or command style there. Hill was commanded to put his division along a ridge on the Confederate right, and because of some swampy ground along his front, there was a 600-yard gap in Hill's line. He did not think that, because of the vegetation and the swamp, that the Federals would cross through that area. So he just left it open, and the closest reserve brigade was about, I think, a half mile behind them. And Federal Major General George Meade's division actually exploited that gap and ended up routing two of Hill's brigades and a part of a third. Hill asked Major Jubal Early for his division to help repulse the attack, and they did. Hill's division suffered over 2,000 casualties during the battle, which was nearly 2/3 of the casualties in Jackson's entire corps during the Battle of Fredericksburg. Brigadier General James Archer criticized him for the gap in the division's front, saying that Hill had been warned about it before the battle, but had done nothing to correct it. Hill was also absent from his division, and there were rumors that he had been captured during the assault, but again, I believe it was because of his illness. During a lull in the campaign, Jackson began essentially going back after Hill. He brought up 8 different charges of dereliction of duty, which Hill demanded a trial by court-martial or a court of inquiry into them. Lee did not want that to happen and refused, because he really did not want to lose at least he didn't want Jackson Hill being tied up into that sort of thing with the spring coming. Of course, as we know, the Battle of Chancellorsville comes out next. And after Jackson's corps does their successful flank march, Jackson rides out to scout enemy lines to prepare for a night assault. Hill is actually with Jackson when he was wounded. And while he is trying to tend to the general's wound and get the general onto a gurney for to get back to the hospital, Hill is actually wounded, shot in the leg, and was unable to command for some time. And of course, after Jackson's death in 1863, and as we mentioned at the beginning of this talk, Jackson calls for Hill there in his subconscious on his deathbed. Lee reorganizes the army from the 2 great wings that he had to actual corps, 3 corps. And when Lee is doing this, he writes Jefferson Davis and suggests to Jefferson Davis that A.P. Hill be put in command of 1 corps, and Richard Ewell be put in command of the other corps. And Davis agreed, and that's when he's promoted to Lieutenant General of Corps Command right before the Gettysburg Campaign. Hill does get a lot of crap about the Gettysburg Campaign, but I'll get to that in my post-scripted thoughts. Hill's tenure as commander of the 3rd Corps began during the Gettysburg Campaign. Hill's illness from his youthful visit in New York returned with a vengeance as Lee's army entered Pennsylvania. The disease had progressed at this point to such a state that Hill was described as being pale, weak, and in constant pain, especially when riding on horseback. He also found it difficult to adjust to corps command, and honestly, who can blame him? You've been commanding a division, and now you're, commanding 3 divisions underneath you. Kind of hard to do there on the fly, with only being a month on the job. I digress. I'll get into that earlier. However, on July 1st, 1863, Hill's troops initiated the Battle of Gettysburg, achieving early success before suffering heavy casualties. The 3rd Corps bore the brunt of the fighting on the first day, and also really on the 3rd day with Pickett's charge. Pickett's charge, of course, gets the name, but Pickett's division was just 1 division. The other divisions came from Hill's division, and Longstreet even requested from General Lee that he put Hill in charge because 2/3 of the troop came from Hill's corps. But Lee left it to Jackson because he had seniority on the field. Not Jackson, excuse me, Longstreet. My God, if we had Jackson there. But Longstreet had the seniority on the field. Hill faced criticism for poor coordination, though the ultimate Confederate defeat was due to a broader, strategic failures. Hill's performance at Gettysburg, while marked by bravery, also highlighted the difficulties he encountered in organizing and executing large-scale operations. Again, talking about Hill, he was used to being a division commander, and he was used to fighting with his men, riding through the front lines, leading from the front with his red battle shirt on, not necessarily being in the rear as a corps commander is supposed to. And he was trying to adjust on the job, on the fly. Following the Gettysburg campaign, Hill remained indisposed until the fall and was able to serve in the major campaigns, including the Battle of Bristoe Station in October of 1863. His poorly planned attack there, resulted in a disastrous defeat, though. Hill's men proved vital in the Overland Campaign of 1864, and during fierce combat at the Wilderness, Hill's corps held back multiple U.S. Troop attacks during the first day, but became severely disorganized as a result. Despite several requests from his division commanders, Hill refused to straighten and strengthen his line during the night, possibly due to Lee's plan to relieve them at daylight. At dawn on the second day of the battle, the Union launched an attack that briefly drove Hill's corps back, with several units routed, but the First Corps under Longstreet arrived just in time to reinforce him. At Spotsylvania Courthouse, Jubal Early temporarily took command of the Third Corps. Hill was sick. Still, Hill could hear that his men were doing well because he observed the battle at Lee's side. After recovering and regaining his corps, he was later rebuked by Lee for his piecemeal attacks at the Battle of North Anna. By then, Lee himself was too ill to coordinate his subordinates in springing a planned trap against Union forces. Lee had diarrhea at the time. I believe that's the correct battle. Somebody will correct me if I'm wrong. And actually was not on Traveler, but actually was having to command from a carriage because he couldn't ride. But after that rebuking from Lee, Hill, kind of does a 180. At the next major engagement at Cold Harbor, Hill held the Confederate left flank, but 2 divisions of his corps were used to defend against the Federal main attack on the right flank on June 3rd. When part of his troops gave way, or part of the troops gave way, Hill used 1 brigade to launch a successful counterattack. So again, his men are spread out all throughout the battlefield, literally on 2 wings of the army. And when a portion breaks, he's able to help plug the gap. By the time of the siege of Petersburg in 1864, Hill's health had worsened significantly. Despite his deteriorating condition, he continued to lead his corps. Hill and his men participated in several battles during the fighting leading up and around Petersburg, including Jerusalem Plank Road, the Crater, Globe Tavern, and Second Ream Station, and People's Farm. During this time, Hill's wife and children had moved closer to him, actually lived in the city. So Hill got a little bit of boost of morale with his family nearby, especially because his wife was expecting another child. Also during this time, the dynamic between Lee and Hill began to change because, James Longstreet was, around the Bermuda 100, and given the losses in the Confederate officer corps, Hill suddenly began becoming a trusted confidant of Robert E. Lee. One could attribute that to a multitude of things. I think because of the losses in Confederate officer corps, because Hill's family was nearby him, Lee saw a different side of him, Lee being a great family man as well. And as well as the fact that since Cold Harbor, Hill has grown into the position of Corps Command. That really, impressed Lee tremendously. But still, Hill's health deteriorated to the point that in March of 1865, he was sent to Richmond to recuperate and was recalled on April 1st, 1865, right before the major breakthrough. He arrived to Lee's headquarters on April 2nd, 1865, when the lines were broken by Federal troops. And in a desperate attempt to stem the blue tide, Hill got his orders from Lee and then rode off to find Harry Heath's headquarters through woods that were peppered with Federal troops. It's important to note that Hill, there are accounts that Hill wished that if the Confederacy would not survive, that, he would not desire to live to see the collapse of the Confederacy. While riding through the woods, Hill encountered, and he only had 1 staff officer with him. He didn't have a full, entourage. That's important to point out because he encountered 2 Federal soldiers who were straggling in the woods. Hill pulled his pistol, ordered them to surrender. The Federal troops were shocked for a second and looked around and saw that Hill was by himself. He had outpaced a staff member. One of the Federals, I want to say a certain word about him, but I won't. Because they're my views and opinions, but I still don't want this to be a PG-13 show right now. Noticed that he was alone, and they fired their weapons. 1 bullet hit A.P. Hill in the heart, and he fell dead on the ground, his hazel eyes closed forever. Hill's aide returned to headquarters and gave Lee the devastating news. Lee ordered a charge of troops forward to go and procure Hill's body, which they did. They took his remains to his wife and had a funeral with full military honors the same day. When Lee heard of Hill's death, he tearfully uttered, "He is now at rest, and we who are left are the ones to suffer." He was originally buried in Petersburg. The body was later moved to Richmond, and was moved again in Richmond, and then now is, I believe, in Centerville, Virginia. Hill's wife gave birth to a fourth daughter 2 months later, and named her Anna Powell Hill, or Little AP. She, like her eldest sister, died in childhood. Two daughters, Frances Russell and Lucy, lived to adulthood and married, but they never had children. In addition, Kitty Hill mourned her husband for the rest of her life and refused to talk about the war or his role in it, which some scholars tend to believe is one of the reasons why AP Hill is rather unknown, especially when you compare him to Jackson, where after the war, Mrs. Jackson did write a couple of books about Jacksons and published their letters. But the Confederacy died soon after Powell Hill's demise. Richmond fell, and Lee's army surrendered at Appomattox 7 days after his death. Hill was is remembered as being very affectionate with his rank and file soldiers. One officer called him the most lovable of all Lee's generals. When Hill was reinterred in Richmond the second time, and the monument was dedicated, General James A. Walker at the dedication said of Hill that whenever the headquarters flag of AP Hill floated, whether at the head of a regiment, a brigade, a division, or a corps, or in camp, or on the battlefield, it floated with a pace and a confidence born out of skill, ability, and courage, which infused its confidence and courage into the hearts of all who followed it. One newspaper correspondent wrote of Hill's death, saying, quote, "AP Hill was one of the giants of Lee's army, and disputed with Longstreet and Ewell for the place of affection of the people which Stonewall Jackson once held." Some more interesting things that I found about AP Hill before we get into the general discussion, because we've had the biography. In the late 19th century, interest really began, and of course that's after Reconstruction, after the federal troops have, or active Reconstruction, after the federal troops have left, and the UCV begins taking off, and eventually the SCV takes off. Hill is a very prominent figure in both of those organizations. The SCV camp in Petersburg was formed in 1897. It was named after Hill because he defended the city, and because the Third Corps included Petersburg's own 12th Virginia Regiment, and because he died nearby. That's why they named it after him. In fact, the SCV in the early 1900s began, actually not even the 1900s. The 1888 is the earliest attempt, and that would have been the UCV and the SCV eventually. Began attempt to locate the actual site where he was killed and memorialize the site. The first attempt was in 1888, 1890, and 1903, but it was not until 1911, however, that the SCV particularly was able to undertake a very careful study and located where Hill fell. In April of 1912, the SCV unveiled two monuments denoting the death site of Hill. The larger of the two monuments is located at the Boydton Plank Road and Duncan Road intersection and reads, "To the memory of AP Hill, Lieutenant General CSA, killed about 600 yards northwardly of this marker, being shot by a small band of stragglers from the federal lines on the morning of April 2nd, 1865. Another marker nearby, which is actually closer to the actual spot in April of 1912, it is believed to be the exact spot where Hill fell. And it reads, "The spot where AP Hill was killed." Interestingly enough, when both of those monuments were dedicated, Mrs. Hill and some of the children were there. So yeah, that's let's talk about him.
AP Hill is someone I will say, I don't know if underrated is the word, but
I think underrated. I think the term you're looking for is untold.
untold. I think untold would be a good one because it could. I'm definitely not blaming others, but it's someone I don't hear much about. I have spent a lot of time on Lee and Jackson. Ironically, both of them, and they're the two that mentioned him on their deathbeds. And even then, that didn't spark my interest until Connor kind of actually brought it to my attention when we were planning this episode that they both said it. I kind of sat back and I was like, yeah, they did. And I don't know if I've ever spent a lot of time studying AP Hill. I spent some time when they reinterred him recently. But this episode was, a great time for me to learn. Just hearing about AP Hill and stuff I had no idea about. And then stuff that I was like, okay, we all know Gettysburg. And I think you said it, he, that's a tough rap to live with.
Yeah, well, I think what happens with AP Hill's legacy is something that I mentioned in there is that Hill's widow doesn't talk about the war, and really doesn't talk about Powell Hill either, and I think that's partially because maybe she's heartbroken. I mean she's sitting there and she's a widow. And the war is what took her husband from her.
Yeah.
So you have that. And again, we get through Reconstruction, or active Reconstruction. And we get to the point where now it's, we're beginning to memorialize, and the SCV and UCV in that area have a really strong connection with him, and they began raising money for monuments, including the monument that was in Richmond that served as his headstone, the monuments at his death site, and then we have World War I hit. All right. And the idea of, the Confederacy or memorializing the Confederacy goes on the back burner a little bit, because we have, troops that have just died in the Great War, the war to end all war. And then after that, we have the Depression that, runs rampant through America. Then after the Depression, we go into World War II. And of course, in 1953, I believe it was, that Dr. McCain becomes adjutant in chief. He begins trying to rebuild the SCV. And it's not until the 80s and 90s is when the great resurrection for, the war between the states occurs, when reenacting really kicks off. And I mean, yeah, there was some during the centennial. But, during this time period that I'm mentioning as well, you have Southall Freeman, who writes Lee's biography. You have the paper or the books written by Mrs. Jackson. And again, there's nobody that sat down and wrote a definitive biography until James Budd Robertson wrote his on AP Hill, and he just kind of just by accident slipped out of our mind. But he is, to me, he is a great example. Several different lessons that we can take out of his life is like, one, for example, is no matter what life throws at you, continue to go with it. If you have something that's debilitating you, it's not necessarily, it's a part of who you are, but don't let it define you. Just like, Moose, you have dyslexia. I've got a touch of it too. Yours is worse than mine. That's a part of you, but that's not what defines you as a person. Is one key thing out of Hill's life.
I can't agree more. I think that's what's really drawn me to him, is just some of the situations that happened in his life, and he just kept on trucking and still managed to be very successful and a good leader.
Yeah, and he gets a bad rap after Gettysburg, but it's kind of like this, at least in my opinion of it. He's replacing Stonewall Jackson, so it's like when Tom Brady retired after winning that last Super Bowl, and you have that, or not even Tom Brady, the current coach of the University of Alabama. Right?
Yeah.
He's having to fill the shoes of Nick Saban.
Would not want that job.
Exactly. What did you just say? Say it louder for the people in the back.
I would not take that job even if you doubled what you were paying Nick Saban to me.
Right.
Because chances are, in people's eyes, you might not never fill them shoes, especially when you're stepping up after a great leader like that. I couldn't imagine the pressure you'd feel under to be like them or be as good as them or be better than them. And this is like, okay, yeah, I get it. I have to be as good as them, but this is still my first outing in this position.
Right. So you have that expectation already thrown upon him going into him is to be like Stonewall Jackson. You take the entire Gettysburg campaign between the mixture of Stewart not being there, the bad communications, all that we know, and again, Hill has been on the job for roughly a month at this point. So yeah.
I got a couple years ago, I got thrown into a position I wasn't expecting, and I can't tell you how long it took me to get used to that role.
It's not my fault.
A little bit, but it took me forever to get used to it. I don't know exactly when I started getting in the motion and being able to, but because I didn't shave that night. I was clean shaved at the time. Because I didn't shave that night because I got in late, I waited to shave that morning. Well, for people who know me, I'm notoriously slow so that caused me to be late. I hit every red light, I think, in the city of Biloxi. And, I'm showing up late. I mean, and people are just staring at you. I get it.
Well, yeah. Well, I mean, it's just like, again, I hate to harken back to a sports analogy, but your first year in any professional sport you're a rookie.
Mm-hmm.
You're not a veteran. He was not a veteran corps commander going into a major battle like that. Mm-hmm. The reason why Lee had Longstreet run Pickett's charge, or commands Pickett's charge, is because Longstreet had the seniority and should have been used to commanding a corps at that point, and should have looked at followed the orders and not held back for 3 hours and watched his men get heat stroke in the July sun and them throwing up and passing out under. Anyway, I'm getting off topic and talking about Longstreet. Yeah, no, this is historical fact. But but there's a reason why Lee delegated that to Longstreet. He had the seniority. He knew that he was. And as we watch him struggle and struggle through the rest of 1863 and the first half of 1864 until he has a come to Jesus meeting with Robert E. Lee, we see Hill suddenly come into position of greatness, for lack of a better term. I think that just the timeline is what gives him a bad rap. He's given a monumental task, and it's during a bad time. When it is, and I think that's why history judges him as such. The other thing I love about A.P. Hill, we've referred to trying to be very polite about his youthful indiscretions and his old soldier's disease, as it's often referred to as. but that's something that today is, if you take and look at what he did, and the results of those actions, and you put those compare them to a 2025 lens. I almost said 2024, but the lens of 2025, it's something that we see happening all the time, and it's something, at least on college campuses, and it's something that we can, because he has that one imperfection, and I use that term lightly, one blot. It humanizes him. And we in America have the tendency to deify our heroes way too much. In the Revolution, it's George Washington. George Washington was, it's almost like George Washington, came out fully grown on a horse and led the revolution. There's a musical called 1776, and
lightning strikes, and now
Franklin did this. Franklin did this. Franklin did that. Franklin smote the ground, and out sprung George Washington, fully grown and on a horse. And Franklin electrified him with his miraculous lightning rod. And the three of them, Washington, Franklin, and the horse, won the revolution. and that's the situation. That's the situation that we see with the American Revolution. In the war between the states, our enemies, or those people rather, do the same thing with Abraham Lincoln. Lincoln, if you study it, Lincoln was a tyrant. Lincoln was a horrible person. Lincoln, did more to wreck this nation than any president until most recent history. He's the one that set the executive power as he allowed Hamiltonian America to take over, whereas Jeffersonian America was the leading up for the past 80 years was the way to go, and still the way to go today. That's my views and opinions.
Amen.
But I digress back onto it. They deify Lincoln. We ourselves, we deify Lee and Jackson. We try to find no fault in them. But at the end of the day, they were human, and that's the thing. Until we humanize and make the world realize that yes, these men were men. That's how we start changing the minds, because what would you cannot think of what you would do in that situation, how you would react in that situation, until it's a humanized situation, a situation you can find yourself or think about yourself in. And you cannot do that until your examples are, flesh and bone. That's another thing I've loved about learning about AP Hill was that. And again, it's finding somebody that history forgot for whatever reason, or at least I've heard about, I've read about when reading about Lee and Jackson and things like that, but I've not really studied, because he's not one of the major ones. And how many of them are there out there? How much forgotten Confederate history is there? I mean, we're dedicating the first half of this season to other forgotten Confederate generals like Earl Van Dorn, Sterling Price. Granted, Earl Van Dorn, he's got a movie coming out about him. But
I can't wait to see it.
Buddy Tim Craddock's in it.
Hey,
but you have, there's a movie that's now coming out about him, but it's been 160 years since his story was told, and the only thing they're really focusing on is the last little bit of his life. And again, that may be one reason why Hill was forgotten, is pop history is influenced by history. Or not that came out wrong with my dyslexia, got the words backwards. Pop history is influenced by pop culture. So again, you look at the success of the movie, or the book Killer Angels, then the movie Gettysburg, and again, as I say in my Barksdale talk, unless you're John Bell Hood from Texas, or unless you're from unless you're from Maine, pretty much, you have to be from Virginia and to be mentioned or get any screen time in that movie. They don't even really talk about where Longstreet was from in the Carolinas, except for like one little clip of it. But growing up, I automatically assumed he was a Virginian. So there's a ton, and that's what we're trying to do is this is there's a ton out there that we need to educate ourselves on, especially with somebody who had as much influence on the war as he did, enough to where on their deathbeds he was running through their subconscious for some reason. The two greatest commanders that greatest partnership that was out there, Lee and Jackson, they died 7 years apart. Jackson died, then Hill died, then Lee died, but still during Hill, was part of their mind. And why is that?
That definitely does say something. And I honestly, I can't wait to read any more about AP Hill. I might jump ahead. I do want to save a book for the book club, but I definitely just kind of...
We got to finish the first book first.
I know we got to finish the first book, but I still want to read about AP Hill in the book club, but I might squeeze in another book.
Well, go read my notes on Patreon.
Oh, yeah. You do post them. Don't get jealous of the Virginians.
I'm not jealous of the Virginians. Look, I weirdly enough, and I'm not related to AP. I wish I was. My grandmother's maiden name was Hill, and during the Revolution, they were up in Southern Virginia and Northern North Carolina, or Upper North Carolina, and my Revolutionary War ancestor on her side of the family served in the Continental Dragoons. He was a lieutenant in the Continental Dragoons as a Hill. So I'm not hating the Virginians. I've got another ancestor that, was in Jamestown. He's an uncle. He was at Jamestown. I'm not hating on the Virginians. It's just my family had the common sense to get out of there.
Ooh. We were always North and South Carolina. Then my Confederate ancestor traveled to Mississippi. He was heading somewhere else, but the wagon wheel fell off, and he was just done at that point.
No, we had land grants.
I don't remember exactly where we were going. We could have been going to southern Mississippi or Alabama, but I know we weren't supposed to get off where we got off. And Private S.O. Dawes, or at that time just S.O. Dawes, wagon wheel fell off. He went out to fix it, couldn't get it fixed. He was like, he looked around, said, well, I guess this is as good a spot as any. And that is how the Dawes family got to Mississippi. And we have stayed here ever since.
Yeah, Dad's family got 9 generations ago. We fought in that revolution, whooped them British the first time, and moved on into Mississippi. Well, we first moved to Georgia. Then we're like, Georgia, and we sold the land in Georgia. And then we moved to Mississippi because there were 2 major roads that went through territorial Mississippi. One was the Natchez Trace, and the other one was from Pensacola to Baton Rouge. And the federal government appointed him as the federal agent for a stretch of that road. And then we began statehood, and then War of 1812 happened, and we whipped the British again. Then statehood, and he was a representative at statehood. And then there was the whole Andrew Jackson was like, hey, let's move the Indians out west. And then, he went and signed a treaty, and he got a section and a half of land. And then the war happened. Then the Depression happened. Then the federal government came and took most of the land. And now here we are.
The story of
very depressing rise and fall.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think a lot of Southerners have those stories from after the war. God bless us.
One of Mama's ancestors got hacked to death by hatchets.
SO somehow made it out, and he was.
Oh, this is in the 1830s in Simpson County.
Oh yeah, well, my ancestor got here in the 1830s, 1840. It wasn't long after statehood we made it.
That's the one thing I'm proud to say that unless it is a very distant cousin that I do not know of, I have even then a very distant cousin really doesn't count. But all of my direct ancestors were and collateral ones, in the war generation, were living in Mississippi by were either born or living in Mississippi by 1848.
Yeah, I will see in my lifetime 100 years of the Dawes men in Mississippi, and that's crazy to think. I think SO was like, he was my age when he got here, and he was Dad's age when he went off the war. Maybe a bit younger than Dad. I would have to do the math again. But
versus what, 50?
50, 60, who knows?
Can't tell with the bald head.
If he's well, the man doesn't age. People still think he's like in his 30s or my older brother. Like, what the heck? No, he's my father.
He's old.
Say that. I get home tonight and he's like, well, since I'm so old, you're going to have to get out of the house. But Dad, I'm a broke, poor college student. I don't care. Okay. All right.
No, I think he's saying for
I know. I said 100.
Your math, your math was wrong.
I'm dyslexic.
You can't do math in your head.
I can't do math. The
Even
only
outside,
I had was in history.
Even outside of my head.
Even outside of my, I only have 10 fingers. Oh crap! He is watching. There we go. Get kicked out of the house tonight, boys. No, I think he was a bit younger than you, wasn't he, Dad? SO, when he went to the war?
Forrest, just to scream.
Just scream. Maybe he'll hear me from where I am from the farm. Just yell as loud as I can.
So, going through the chat, I see a lot of y'all are throwing out names like that. And I'm very glad that y'all are. That's one thing that I'm glad about doing these research topics with chat, because once I've got the research down and as I add on to it, that's suddenly a talk that I can give to an SCV camp. You can do the same thing. So, go ahead and do the research on those unknown generals, especially those from your area. Go give those talks to your camps, and let's get the history of these guys out there. Because again, I was talking to PCIC T-Rex earlier.
Roar.
And we were talking about this episode and why it's important. You think of AP Hill's Corps, and you look at the makeup of AP Hill's Corps. He had a mixture of everybody. He had Mississippians, Tennesseans, North Carolinians, Virginians, all under his command. And if his men loved him the way that historical accounts are, then surely that means that we should love him as well. There's a reason why our ancestors loved him. So let's look into that. And you think about how many men that AP Hill led into battle. So that could be your ancestor. That could be your camp member's ancestor. It could be the thing to, the talk that gets somebody more and more fired up.
Yeah, very true. And I'm looking forward to this series and learning more about these brave men and some of these battles. I think you put a battle on the schedule card. I won't say what it is. I'm not that crazy.
I've already mentioned it. We have two. We have Second Corinth and the Meridian Expedition.
Yes.
So Second Corinth, we're doing that. So we're doing Sterling Price next week, and these are not meant to be comprehensive biographies. This is not to be your we do the research on it, and we're writing these. But these are not to be your end all be all. This is supposed to be hey, we've whet your appetite. You found AP Hill interesting. Well, go and get a book on AP Hill. Go get Robertson's book on AP Hill, or one of the others that David Pope's mentioning in the chat. Get them, read them, do your research. You may find out something about, especially if your ancestor was in that unit, something that is interesting dealing with that specific regiment. Written in there, or you may discover something about your ancestor that you did not know, or at least if it's talking about like the siege of Petersburg and how cold it was in January of 1865, 160 years ago right now, and you're going outside and it's snowing, or you're outside and it's 32 degrees outside, and it's just you're miserably cold, and maybe it'll make you think about their sacrifice and make you appreciate them more. But this series, and kind of it's the way we started the show and what we're going back to, is to help you appreciate. It's to whet your appetite so that you can go in there and do your own research. Because in this war of current neo-Yankee Marxism,
war,
third round of Reconstruction. This is our ammunition is, we have two forms of ammunition. We have money to pay off our museum. Please consider giving a donation. And we have our education and being educated about this stuff. So definitely go and do some more research on it. And if I got something wrong, hey, you know what? I love to be proved wrong.
No, you don't.
Yeah, I do. I like to be proved wrong by strangers. You're not allowed to prove me wrong, Moose. Because there's so few times that you're actually right. Like Forrest being 80.
We all knew I was joking. Of course, I know my father's age. Dang. Trying to make me look bad.
Do you?
Yes, I do.
Okay.
Now, I'm not going to lie. When I was in high school, you could probably catch me off guard with it.
So, again, next week is Sterling Price. So make sure that the Missourians know about it. Next week is, Lord, I think my dyslexia's got
Van Dorn.
Yeah, next week is Earl Van Dorn, which will be fun. And then the week after that is Sterling Price. And then the week after that is 2nd Corinth. Now, Earl Van Dorn, Hearth and Home. Okay, so what I sent you in that original, we're gonna have to move around. So Earl Van Dorn, Sterling Price, Hearth and Home, then 2nd Corinth, February 3rd. Then Ward Adams, Meridian Campaign, then S.D. Lee, Hearth and Home, William Mahone, W.C. Walthall, or E.C. Walthall, rather. And then we should be back to Hearth and Home.
Sounds good to me. And, of course, everybody knows that April on this platform, on our shows, are very interesting and chaotic. So much content in April.
Yeah, we got to figure out. I got to start working on the video because I'm going to be. Well, looking at the email address, we've got one news story.
We have a couple that I'll have to go through there and look at them.
2 news stories, 3 news story, 4 news story.
We'll have a good look around next week.
This week, 5 news stories.
I have a camp meeting this week.
See?
So for those who don't know, it'll be announced on the page tomorrow, but Wednesday we're having a rerun of the most watched episode of 2024, which is ironically the most watched episode in SCV Chat history, our General Jackson episode to honor General Jackson's 200th anniversary. We did that last year as a big celebration. Y'all helped us celebrate Jackson by making that, of course, our most watched episode, not just of the season, butt of all time. And with over 14,000 views on just one episode is crazy. We usually, one episode, and I'm talking about just like this episode here, usually gets 2,000 to 3,000 views. And so that's 6,000 views a week. So just that week we reached 20,000 people with just 2 episodes. So that was a big deal. And so that will be rerun Wednesday in honor of just celebrating 2024 and saying goodbye to it. And then Thursday was supposed to be Commander's Comments, but we had to cancel this month because of some scheduling conflicts. So we'll be doing a rerun of December's Commander's Comments. And Look Around will be back to its regularly scheduled programming for a new season next Thursday.
Well, that's good. Hey, and don't forget that tomorrow night, Tuesday night, is Look Around Florida with Sean McFall. Yeah, I'm glad that you've already went ahead and rescheduled the episode because I could not fill in on Thursday. Thursday is Mississippi Secession Day, so Independence Day. And also my mother's birthday. So I kind of need to be there for that. But
oh yeah, I mean I was a camp officer, so there's no way I can miss this Thursday anyway. And I'm looking forward to our Lee Jackson banquet at the Samuel H. Poe camp. But
hey, Forrest, what am I supposed to come down there and talk to y'all? Or just watching?
I'll just pop by. No,
not this Thursday.
just randomly shows up. Hey, how y'all doing? I'm Connor.
No,
like you haven't been there before.
Yeah, if I can't do this Thursday because if not, I'll have to find a.
No.
You think you and I will both have to find a house to live in?
Yeah.
And I'm not paying your rent.
Oh, come on. We could room together. Think of all the content we could do. Non-stop SCV chat 24/7.
I'd kill him.
That's just cruel.
Next weekend, Lee Jackson celebration in Lexington, Virginia.
Hey,
it is on my bucket list to go up there. I can't do it this year because I'm performing a wedding.
I do.
So I'll be. Well, that would work better, given the client that I've taken on and the nature of work. Can't wait for Jeff Davis's birthday to get here any sooner. But anyway, remember to tune in on Sundays for Michael C. Hardy's History Talks. Go follow his page. Make sure that you're doing that. Mondays, as always, is SCV Chat, unless something rips or tears. Tuesdays, you have Look Around Florida with Sean McFall. Wednesdays, nothing. Thursdays, Look Around the Confederation. And Fridays, the Douglas Southall Freeman Chat there in Dave's group. We're going to go ahead and sign off here. Look forward to a successful 2025. Make sure you're taking pictures of your Lee Jackson banquets and stuff like that and submitting them to us at scvoutreach@gmail.com. We'll be back next Monday. Same SCV Chat channel, same SCV Chat time. And one final story. Little bit of SCV history for you. The headquarters for the Sons Confederate Veterans before we had Elm Springs after it left from Richmond, Virginia was at the War Memorial Building in Jackson, Mississippi. And day after Christmas on Boxing Day, Forrest and I went through several boxes of files and found the correspondence of William H. Philpott. So anyway, in the words of the late and great Harold Philpott, though, no Fumar in the elevator.
No Fumar in the elevator.
Take us out, Moose.
Rare Frop.